Hi, and welcome to the Canvas Church podcast, where you can listen to our weekly sermons. Thanks for joining us on this journey as we look to God's Word to mold us into people becoming the church.
All right, here we go. We are in week 5 of our We Believe series. This series was really created out of a desire for us as a church to fight for unity. And in order to fight for unity, you gotta fight for, surround and unite around the things that the church has always believed since its beginning. Another reason why we jumped into this We Believe series is so that we can continue to hold on to truth. That's encouraged the Apostle Peter. He encouraged us just to hang on to the truth. Paul said it to Timothy when he was getting ready to stop apprenticing him because Paul knew his life was coming to an end. He told Timothy to hang on to truth. And another reason why we jumped into this series is so that those of us who are believers, we have the ability to communicate these truths that we believe. Like when we enter into spiritual conversations with people, we want to be able to articulate well. 1 Peter also tells us that we need to be able to give a reason for the faith that we hold, and we need to hold on to that. So we jumped into this, and then also, along with it, knowing that those of you who attend on a regular basis, and you come in, you're not yet a follower of Christ, and you're kicking the tires of faith, you're unsure about it. What does this mean? What does it look like to become a Christian? This We Believe series gives you a great platform to understand what we believe and why we believe it. So this morning we are jumping into part 5. It is called General Revelation. Now, a few weeks back, as a staff, we did a little team building exercise, which is always fun. Get out of the office, do something a little bit different, kind of shake up the routine, do some team building, some bonding, and we decided to go to the Locked-In Escape Room on 4th Street. Anybody done an escape room before? Pretty fun. It was my first experience doing an escape room, and we did what was called Nautilus. And what was interesting about Nautilus is it really is one of the biggest fears that I have, which is a totally irrational fear, because I will never find myself on a submarine. It's not gonna happen. One of the reasons is because I worked on submarines for a long time. And I thought to myself, almost every time I was on it, why would somebody get on this big old hunk of steel and allow it to dive to the depths of the sea? It is beyond my comprehension why people do it, but they do. And the whole premise behind Nautilus down at Locked-In Escape Room is that you're on a submarine. And all of a sudden, all of the systems have gone awry, and the submarine is diving to the depths of the sea. Terrifying, okay? That is an absolute nightmare. And as it's on the way to the depths of the sea, you and your team in the room, you have to figure out what has gone wrong. You have to solve the problems in order to make sure that the submarine can get back to the surface. There are alarms going off. There are lights blinking inside of the room. It is chaos. It's pandemonium inside of there. Now, I will just say this real fast. If you're ever on a submarine that is diving to the depths of the sea, our bookkeeper, Kia, our kids director, Ashlyn, and our tech director, John. Those are the 3 people you want on the submarine with you. The rest of us really provided not much. We were just flipping toggles and switches. And what makes an escape room fun is at the end of the day, there is really no danger. Nobody is really in danger. There is the illusion of danger, but there's no danger. In fact, before they lock you into the room, the person that's facilitating the game, they let you know this big red button here by the door. If you panic, hit the button, you can get out of the room. So it's just simply an illusion of danger. There's actually no danger there. So in the midst of an illusion of danger, it's super fun to try to figure out riddles and solve clues and toggle switches and turn knobs until you finally solve the puzzle. If you are truly on a submarine plummeting to the depths of the ocean, there would be nothing fun about unsolved riddles and untoggled switches. It would be an absolute disaster. You don't want hidden clues. You want things to get fixed immediately. You want the riddle to be solved. Now, there is a persistent belief that if God is real, He's playing a cosmic game of hide and go seek with humanity. You hear this all the time from people. Like if God was really real, he would have made himself better known. He would have been more forthright with who he is. He would have come out and shared who he is with everybody. Like if God is really real, he would have made it completely clear to us. Now, this is no escape room kind of a problem. In fact, eternity rests on this reality if there is a God or if there is not a God. So this isn't a small problem. This is a cosmic problem. This is an eternal issue. In fact, the scriptures say that this is an issue between life and death. Recently, I was listening to a podcast, The Sean Ryan Show. Sean Ryan was a Navy SEAL. Then he was a CIA operative. And then he became a podcaster. And he has people from the intelligence community on his show. He has people from the military on his show. He has thought thinkers, I don't even know if it's a thing, but thought leaders, that's what I was looking for, thought leaders, and they come on and they have really interesting and engaging conversations. Well, here recently, within the last year, Sean Ryan has given his heart to Christ. And he is on the very front end of his journey, and it's very interesting to listen to him talk to people as he's beginning to flesh out what does it look like to follow Jesus. And one of the guests that he had on his show, no surprise, it was Lee Strobel. Lee Strobel is a leading apologist, somebody who can defend his faith. He's written several books that are I highly recommend: The Case for Faith, Case for Christ, Case for God. There's 3 of them that if you haven't experienced any of those, I encourage you to read them. But he has Lee Strobel on his show because he knows he's got some really important questions that he wants to ask one of the leading apologists, somebody who can defend the faith. And they have a very interesting dialogue, conversing back and forth. And then finally, Sean Ryan cuts to the chase. And this is what he asks Lee Strobel. He says, why doesn't God just show up and make it undeniable to everyone that he exists? Why doesn't God just do it? Why doesn't he just show up and make it undeniable to everybody that he exists? Maybe you're here this morning and that's your position. That's what keeps you like questioning, just simply kicking the tires of faith, not sure about faith. Like you're just kind of on the edge. Like, what is faith all about? And maybe the idea in your mind is, if God was really real, he would have just done a better job at making himself known to the world around him. And as Sean Ryan asked this question to Lee Strobel, I'm in my truck yelling, literally, he has. God has shown up. He has made himself known. And over the next couple of weeks, we're going to uncover the ways in which God has made himself known. Theologians, they break up this topic into 2 broad categories. One is general revelation. So God has made himself known through general revelation, and then he's made himself known through special revelation. This morning, we are covering general revelation. And by covering it, by no means am I saying is this an exhaustive study on the way God has generally revealed himself to humanity. But I am saying we're going to cover some topics that you can spend some time on your own diving deeper into. For those who are believers in here, I encourage you to do it because it will help strengthen your faith, and it will help you, each one of these arguments will help you be able to communicate and defend or share your faith with others better. For those of you who are here and you're not yet followers of Jesus, again, you're just kicking the tires of faith. This entry-level discovery into the way God has generally revealed himself to humanity is a great opportunity for you also to dive deeper. Rather than to remain a skeptic, I've always said it's easy to be a skeptic, to stand on the sidelines and say, I don't know if that's true or not. You're uncommitted. You're not committed to there is no God, and you're not committed to there is a God. It's like, I don't know, I'm not really sure. But if it's true that eternity depends on this, it would be worth your time digging into these 3 areas of discovery, the way that God has revealed himself to humanity. This morning, we can sum up our conversation together in this one statement. We believe God has revealed himself through creation, through conscience, and through common grace. So we believe God has revealed himself through creation, conscience, and common grace. We're going to take a look at Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2 this morning, portions of each of these two chapters. We spent a ton of time in Romans back over the summer, and we touched on these in broader topics of the morning's message. This morning we have an opportunity to dig just a little bit deeper into the text. Paul, he's the one who writes Romans to us. Well, he's writing it to the Roman church, but we have it today in our scriptures. So he's writing this, and he's laying out a case for the problem humanity is in. And he's laying out for them how he is so grateful for the gospel because Jesus Christ changes our life through the gospel. And then he goes on to communicate, and we're going to pick it up in verse 19. He says this, they means humanity, okay? They know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. So he's preempting this idea that people are going to cry out, but God has not made himself known. Right? Like 2,000 years ago, Paul had, through the inspiration of the Spirit of God, he had the wherewithal to understand the argument that was going to be made. If God was real, he would have revealed himself to us in a better way. And he's saying they know the truth about God because he has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and the sky. And you have to know that when they're talking about the earth and the sky back in those days, they're talking about like everything that can be known about life, creation itself. They've been able to see the earth and the sky. Through everything God has made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities. Because of this world we live in, we can look around and make some good conclusions on what it is that we see. Through everything God has made, he can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So if there's this broad umbrella of invisible qualities, these two things fall underneath that broad umbrella. His divine power, or rather his eternal power, and his divine nature underneath it. And then he finishes it up here by saying, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. At the end of the day, what Paul is saying is there is no excuse. And then if we flip over to chapter 2, verse 14, it says, even the Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. So what Paul is doing is he's talking directly to Jews who had the law of God. God handed it down to Moses at Mount Sinai after he delivered Israel out of slavery in Egypt. He sets them out at the base of Mount Sinai and he delivers his law to them. Like, this is the way my people should act inside of humanity. That's what the 10 Commandments are. And he's saying that the Jews have those 10 Commandments. And then he's saying the Gentiles, those who did not have the 10 Commandments, they didn't live by them, they didn't have them, they were not a part of their tradition, they were not a part of their culture. In fact, some of them had never even heard of the 10 Commandments. He says that they revealed that they understand who God is because their conscience tells them to. Even the Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts. For their own conscience, their thoughts either accuse them or they tell them they are doing right. We've all been in those moments, haven't we? We have done something and we're like, that felt good. I want to do that more often. I love serving other people because that feels good. And we've also been in the moments where we walked away and felt a tremendous amount of shame, a tremendous amount of guilt because we knew what we were doing was wrong. That's what Paul is saying. And then he goes on to say in verse 16, And this is the message I proclaim, that the day is coming when God, through Christ Jesus, will judge everyone's secret life. There's a day coming where Jesus is going to judge everybody's secret life. That too can be terrifying. That can be terrifying, that Jesus, he knows what goes on in secret. So Paul agrees this morning that the stakes can't be any higher. There is a day where Jesus is coming to judge everything that has been done. Like he is coming to like lay down a verdict at the end. And remember, leading up to this declaration that God is going to judge the world through Jesus one day, Paul says this: man is without excuse. Man is without excuse. I love excuses. I've used them throughout my life. Whenever I get myself in a predicament, I usually, first thing I do is I'm looking for an excuse on how to rationalize it or talk my way out of it. And God knew that when it came to our relationship with him, that was what we would level against him. God just simply did not make himself well enough known. Why didn't he tell us? Why didn't he show us better? But Paul says, man is without excuse because since the creation of the world, God has made himself known. God made himself obvious. God has made himself obvious. In fact, God has made himself so obvious that even the oblivious can't say, well, God, I just didn't know. Maybe you can relate with this illustration. I've been pulled over before, a couple of times. You get pulled over, an officer walks up to the car, and what's the first thing that he or she generally says to you? Do you know why I pulled you over? And my general response is, no. Now, it's been a long time since I've been pulled over, but no. Or, yeah, I was going a little fast. But there were times like, no, I'm not exactly sure why you pulled me over. Well, you were going 50 and a 35. To which the natural response is, oh, I didn't know it was only 35 miles an hour through there. To which the officer then points out every speed limit sign you've passed in the last several miles. Well, you could have known at this turn, you could have known at this spot, you could have known here. Why? Because there was a sign. And the sign all the way along was telling you it is 35 miles an hour. So though I would love to declare ignorance because ignorance is bliss, the officer doesn't give me room for that because he's like, it was obvious. Even if you were oblivious, it was obvious what the speed limit was along the way. And that's what Paul is trying to communicate to us here in this text, is that man is without excuse. God has made himself obvious even to the oblivious. This morning, we're going to isolate the three ways in which God generally reveals himself to humanity, the way he has generally revealed himself to humanity, through creation, through conscience, and through common grace. All of these we found in our text. Every one of them, I encourage you to go back and read the text that we read today. After you've listened to this message, go back and read it and begin to pick things out for yourself along the way. But all of it can be summed up in verse 20 that says, through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature. So number one, through creation, God's power is seen. Through creation, God's power is seen. Now, in each one of these points, I have three of them, right? We got creation, we have conscience, and we have common grace. And through each of these points, I'm going to quote to you an expert in this field. And I'm also going to give you a resource that they have written so that you can go do some self-discovery. I think that there are, like, one of these might land good for one of you, another might land differently for another. Like you might get interested in one of these specific topics. Each one of them are their own discipline in and of themselves, so you can take a deeper dive on your own. So I'm going to quote an expert. I'm going to give you a resource so that you can go on your own journey of deeper discovery on these three areas of general revelation. So again, number one, through creation, God's power is seen. William Lane Craig, who wrote the book On Guard. On Guard is the resource that I would point you to. It's a great resource. That's what he said. The universe came into being from nothing, a fact confirmed by modern cosmology. So it's not even a debate really any longer that the universe had a beginning. So there was an argument that went on for a long time that if God existed forever, if the God of the universe existed forever, was not created, always was, always has been, always will be, then why couldn't the same be for the universe? Why couldn't they both have existed forever? But modern cosmology, the study of the universe, has revealed that the earth had to have a beginning. The universe had a moment where it all began. I would point you to Genesis chapter 1, but do some research on your own. So this is what he says. The universe came into being from nothing, a fact confirmed by modern cosmology. But something cannot come from nothing. Therefore, a transcendent cause must exist. William Lane Craig is pointing to what Paul talked about when Paul talked about God's eternal power. God's eternal power has always existed. God is described as the uncaused first cause. He always has been. He always will be. He existed before time. He will exist after time. That God has always been. And God decided at a point in eternity to speak creation into existence. That God spoke and he began to create. This is talking about God's eternal power. Now, this is not an oversimplification, although I understand how people can level that complaint. Because I'm going to boil this conversation down into a simple sentence. We've talked about this before. We'll talk about it again. And the reason why we distill it down to this simple two ideas, two simple options when it comes to creation, is because there's a lot of noise around creation. It's a very big conversation. And it's easy to get engulfed in all of the noise and get distracted. I get real distracted when there's a lot of noise. And around creation, there's a lot of noise. But when you boil it all down, when you distill it down, there are really just simply two options. Either everything came from nothing randomly, or an intelligent designer who transcends creation itself spoke it into existence. There was an intelligent designer behind it all who shaped and molded this thing together, who spoke with creative power, and what we have today is the product of his creation. Those are really your options. Everything from nothing randomly. Or there was an intelligent designer behind it. Now I'm going to point to an illustration that I think it's just one illustration of many that you could use to talk about this intelligent design. And back in 1996, a guy named Michael Behe, he wrote a book, and I think it's called The Darwin's Black Box, I think is the name of the book. And he talks about, and he coined this term called irreducible complexity. And his desire behind this term, irreducible complexity, was to help point out that randomness doesn't create a sequence of irreducible things. So here's what irreducible complexity is. It's like a mousetrap. The mousetrap needs every one of its components in order for it to function. Without any piece on this trap, right, we have a base, we have a latch, We have a spring thingy. We've got this thing. Keep your fingers out of that. And then, interestingly enough, when I got this is actually a rat trap. I needed a little bit bigger for the stage. It's actually, ironically, missing a piece. I opened it up this morning and it had a broken piece to it. So this mousetrap actually doesn't work. So normally, you'd bring this back, you'd put this over, you'd clip it on something to which you would add, well, cheese, peanut butter. If you've never tried bubble gum before, that is the best bubble gum. Put it on there, said mouse or rat, they go up and eat that, and then you know the rest of the story. The irreducible complexity is if you take any piece of this away, this ceases to be an effective thing. In evolution, survival of the fittest would have disregarded this thing because it was unnecessary. It can't use it. So, in evolution, things have to make small but beneficial changes to themselves where they begin to morph and mold and grow, and then all of a sudden you have something complex. The problem is we have things inside of our bodies that are irreducibly complex. The eyeball, for one. The eyeball is irreducible. Like you take some pieces of the eyeball away, it no longer functions as eyeball. So how does evolution account for this making of the eyeball? The pupil, the retina, all of these different layers of the eyeball when they would have been rejected along the way because the body could not use them. So the argument is because there are irreducibly complex things in our world, it points to an intelligent designer who could speak it into existence. So through creation, God's power is seen. The second one is this: through conscience, God's truth is known. Through conscience, God's truth is known. C.S. Lewis is the expert that I'll point to on this topic this morning. If you're unfamiliar with C.S. Lewis or just have a little familiarity, it's important to note that C.S. Lewis was an atheist. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in God. But he was also a philosopher. And philosophers have a lot of time to sit and think. And they try to wrap their minds around the biggest questions, and they try to get answers and try to figure them out philosophically. And if you've never read C.S. Lewis, I encourage you to do it. It is a tough read, I'm not gonna lie. For one, he's from the UK. They just write differently than we do. Two, he's old, and they write differently than we do too also. But Mere Christianity is a great book to read if you want to slow yourself down and really think through this concept of how conscience points to God's truth. Conscience makes God's truth known. And this is what C.S. Lewis said on this topic. He said this: "My argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust." Isn't that a great, argument against God these days? It's leveled constantly in conversations that I have with people, in listening to conversations on podcasts. Constantly, God is being put on trial because of the way this world is. There's pain, there's suffering, there's injury and harm. People are like, if God is real, how could all of this badness exist, right? So that was C.S. Lewis's argument. My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But then he says, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man doesn't call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. This is what Paul was talking about when he said God's divine nature. What C.S. Lewis recognized was one of the biggest problems he had with God actually pointed to God. There was no way for him to decide what was right and what was wrong unless something else had planted that inside of him. Otherwise, who are we? Unless there is an ultimate authority, who is anyone to say that something is right or something is wrong? That simply, at the end of the day, is just an opinion of a person. So somebody who is doing what we consider wrong behavior, we can't say it's wrong because in their eyes, it seems to be right. Does that seem like a common problem these days? Is that truth is just simply relative to us, and everybody can have their own truth. And friends, that simply is untrue. And C.S. Lewis, as he was working this out in his mind, realized the only way I could say something was wrong or something was unjust is if I had a proper understanding of what was right and what was wrong, and then where in the world did that come from? The Apostle Paul says it comes from God's divine nature. It's planted inside of you. There's a handful of things or behaviors that all people throughout all times in all places have agreed are wrong. See, often when we have a conversation around these things, morality, the moral argument, it's leveled that our morals are just simply a construct of the environment that we find ourselves in. And there are a ton of them that are, for sure. You go to a different culture, right? Like if you go to Germany, they're gonna serve you a warm Coke. That is morally wrong. And if they come here, they would say the same thing about our iced up Coke. So there is a ton of life that is a construct of the environment that we grow up in, just the rules and regulations that we found ourselves around. But there are a handful of behaviors that all people throughout all times in all places have considered to be wrong. Things like this: murder. Cold-blooded murder has been deemed wrong in every culture throughout all time. How about stealing? Stealing has been deemed wrong in every culture throughout all time in all places. If you don't believe me, steal something from somebody who says that stealing is not wrong. They're going to chase you down and get their thing back, right? So murder, stealing, deception. Deception has always been considered wrong by every society, every person throughout all of time. Deception has never been right. And also betrayal. To gain somebody's confidence just simply so that you can backstab them later, to use that confidence against them for your benefit. That has been wrong in every culture throughout all time, in all places. 4 simple ways that Paul says God has revealed his divine nature to us. He's revealed it to us. Another way to say it is God's moral law is hardwired into us. It's hardwired into us. Or let's use words of scripture. God has written it on our hearts. And that's what Romans chapter 2, verses 14 through 17 are all about. Paul is saying the Gentiles who did not even have God's written law, they knew God's written law because when they obeyed it, man, they were happy they did. And when they rebelled against it, they felt the guilt that came along with it. Why? Because God has written his law in the hearts of people. So when we instinctively know what is right and what is wrong, it is God's general revelation to us that there's somebody with more authority than you and I who is trying to guide and direct our lives. So number 1, through creation, God's power is seen. Number 2, through conscience, God's truth is known. And number 3, through common grace, God's goodness is shown. Through common grace, God's goodness is shown. Abraham Kuyper wrote the book Common Grace. In fact, it's a 3-volume set. So he had a lot to say about this topic of common grace. This is what he says. Even in fallen humanity, God restrains the full force of sin, allowing justice, morality, and creativity to persist in the world. Even in fallen humanity, God restrains the full force of sin. We have the ability to look around the world and say things are not right. Things are off. Things are challenging, right? It's like, this can't be the way it has to be, right? So even inside of that reality that there is sin present, God restrains the full force of sin. So we don't see all that would be if God completely removed his hands and said, just have at it all on your own. He allows justice. We have laws that keep criminals in check. Morality, this hardwire into us morality, understanding what's right and what's wrong. And creativity, the ability to enjoy this world around us. Like God still allows these things to persist in the world, part of his divine nature. And I'm so grateful that he does. Our capacity to love, to enjoy life, to experience awe, to laugh, to create, to find contentment, whether we acknowledge God or not, is evidence of God's common grace. Everything that we experience that is good and beautiful and lovely and wonderful, the things that we want more and more of, those exist because of the common grace of God, whether we worship him or not. The scriptures say that God causes the sun to rise and fall, the rain to shine, the rain falls, okay? So God causes the sun to shine and the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. Now, being raised in Western Washington, I always thought that the sun was the good and the rain was the bad, because I just hated rain. But the reality is both the sun and the rain are needed for growth. And God, and what the psalmist is saying is that God gives good gifts to humanity in what's called common grace. A way to define common grace is this: God's unmerited favor given to all people, not just believers. Not just believers. I've been in conversations with people who are not yet followers of Jesus. And they're like, man, life's pretty good. Like, I don't follow Christ. I don't think that I need to, because life is, it's really good. And their thought is this is fine. Like, if this is bad it gets, I'm cool with that. No big deal. But what they fail to recognize is they're still experiencing the common grace of God. That God is still giving them good gifts, even though they don't recognize him as God. Another way to say it is like this: the world that we currently experience right now, for the believer, this is as bad as it gets. This is as bad as it gets. Eternity is going to look so much better. For the unbeliever, what we're experiencing right now, this is as good as it gets. It doesn't get anybody from here. Because what the scriptures tell us is, in eternity, those who have rejected Christ will spend eternity separated from God completely. Completely separated. No common grace. The inability to love and to be loved. The inability to be in awe and to live and to love and to laugh. To create, to be in awe of anything. All of that will be gone in eternity. Why? Because God's common grace will be removed. And again, I say that's why this is not just an escape room kind of a problem. This is an eternal issue with eternal consequences. And that's why we should pause and reflect on the goodness of God, who has revealed himself. Because for every one of us in this room and for those listening online, none of us are with excuse. Like, we have no excuse to not know there is a God who created it all. Now, as we close things up here, I want to point out there are good arguments, good counter arguments for everything that I've presented today. There are good counter arguments out there. There are people who will argue against creation. They will argue against conscience, and they will argue against common good, or common grace, rather. And I would encourage you, take a look at their arguments. But look at their arguments, the best of those arguments, the counter arguments against the best of the arguments for those things, and then decide in the end which one is most probable. which is most probable? Like, I think that's just an honest assessment. That's an honest journey to figuring out who God really is. Level them next to one another. I've spent years reading, researching, studying these topics, and I've looked at the best of both arguments. And at the end of the day, I say it is without question, Creator God exists, and he's revealed himself through general revelation to his people. God is making himself known. So despite sin and rebellion, God still speaks, and he's revealing himself to humanity through conscience, through creation, and through common grace. Why? Because he loves humanity. And I want to close by reading Psalm chapter 8, verses 3 and 4. And this is what it says. This is David, King David. He writes this psalm. He says, when I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for them. The psalmist recognized the absurdity of the creator of the universe caring one iota about a rebellious humanity. But he does. And he's revealed himself because he wants to be in relationship with each one of us. Would you stand to your feet this morning? As you stand, I've got two takeaways. One, memorize and internalize our we believe statement. And number two is this: take time to recognize and respond to God's general revelation this week. Okay? So take time to recognize it and then respond to it. For those of you who are believers, spend time in worship of God because of the way he's revealed himself through those three areas. For those of you who are not, respond, my hope is, by surrendering your life to Christ in a transformational way. If you want to have a conversation about that, let's talk out in the lobby. I'd love to talk with you about what it looks like to follow Jesus with your lives. So, Father, thank you so much for your word. It is a blessing to us. Let it transform our lives because of what we've heard today. Do a work in us, Jesus, in your precious name. Amen. Well, friends, thanks again for carving out part of your weekend to spend with us. Hope you have a fabulous week this week. If today's been beneficial for you, I hope that you come back next week and bring somebody with you. Have an awesome day.
Thanks for tuning in. This concludes today's message. New sermon podcasts are uploaded by Tuesday of each week. We'd also love to invite you to our live gatherings each Sunday at 10 a.m. Our gatherings are also streamed live on YouTube and Facebook each week. On behalf of the Canvas Church team, we hope you have a great week, and we'll catch you next time.